Welcome to the Crafty Mini. Now in this video I'm going to do a deep dive essay format, I suppose, similar type thing, basically looking at the GRIMDARK paint style. It's something I've always leaned more towards, but I want to have a more intricate look at it and what it means, how does it affect the way you paint. And you know, because I think a lot of people, myself included, when I first started painting in that way, it was seen as more of it's basically a more realistic, more grubby version of the box art, as it were. After diving into it a bit more and reading up and other things, I've realised there's a hell of a lot more to it. So in this video, that's what we're going to be looking at. Now in the background, you'll see me paint this particular miniature, which later on in the video I'll go into more depth of what I'm doing and the techniques I'm using. But to begin with, let's just look at GRIMDARK style itself and what it actually is. Right, so the GRIMDARK style itself is it's quite a popular technique, and it focuses on the sort of creating dark, gritty, dystopian-esque looking miniatures. It's influenced heavily in sci-fi, fantasy and horror. It has like a dramatic use of like weathering effects, really intense colour schemes, much sort of darker themes, and use of shadows and more light play in the actual miniature painting itself. Now the idea of this would be to evoke a sense of sort of darkness, violence, decay, you know, making these things look like they belong in the sort of post-apocalyptic dystopian worlds, the miniatures where they actually come from. Now one of the key elements is the very muted colours and limited palettes. So instead of the more vibrant and bright colours that we see, GRIMDARK is often sort of very muted shades, and almost to give a sense of sort of darkness and despair, adding basically an overall mood to the actual miniature you're painting. Now this comes through things like story, the individual style, the setting, all those sort of things add to this. In addition to the muted colours, weathering effects are also a common feature of GRIMDARK. So, you know, dirt, grime, rust, wear and tear, all these sort of things that make the miniature look aged, battle worn. You know, it's that style itself and those techniques that you put onto the actual painting that makes it GRIMDARK. Dramatic lighting can also be part of it, with really high contrast points of light and shadow, and you can create a depth of realism, making the model look more sort of three-dimensional and lifelike, as opposed to the more sort of over-edged highlight box art that we see on a lot of stuff these days. And adding all these things in that we spoke about there together gives this the overall sort of GRIMDARK aesthetic. Now when it comes to painting GRIMDARK itself, it's more about the detail and the precision and the little things that you add to the miniature in order to make them come together and come to life, as it were. So, you know, things like chip paint, blood splatters, torn clothing, they can all enhance the overall look and help you tell the story within the miniature itself. And by focusing on these details, you can bring that miniature to life and create a narrative and emotion in that work. So the inspirations, I suppose, for the actual GRIMDARK style. So there's some that stand out for me personally, and again, this is like I go back to the start. This is the opinion piece, and it's sort of how I interpret it. So there's certain games and films that I think add a lot to the GRIMDARK style. Now I'll place a few of those up now on the screen. You can see those. I think for me there's a lot of overlap between GRIMDARK and horror, because it's that sort of almost high fantastical element of the miniatures themselves. You know, these things are the grotesque and the really dark and almost the twisted things in you could argue, in our psyche, and the messed up things that, you know, we play out in the actual miniature painting. I mean, I could be going really like in depth there, maybe too in depth, I'm not sure, but yeah, it's I think that's all part of it, and it's a, you know, when you want to paint something a monster and make it really disgusting and vile and stand out, then it's by using those influences from, you know, films, games, other painters and things, and it helps tell that story when that miniature's finished, as opposed to, you know, here's a bright blue soldier with his gun, which is beautifully painted and looks fantastic, but then it almost looks like it's out of the setting that it should be in, if that makes sense. So yes, there's certain games, certain films and whatnot that influence me. Now, a couple of other things. So the GRIMDARK Compendium on YouTube, highly recommend. If you haven't heard of them, go and check it out. It's absolutely fantastic. All of the videos on there are phenomenal. The one that stood out for me more than any other was the Black Templar miniature. So the layers of paint and effects, texture and detail on that miniature is amazing. The fact that realistic hair was added to the miniatures, that's something I've never even thought of. But again, in the videos for that channel, they go into it's not just the style and the fact that we're mucking these things up, it's the narrative behind it. What's the story behind that miniature? Why does it look the way it does? Things like this. And I find that that's become more important to the miniatures that I paint, and even when I go and look to buy stuff. So say like when I'm trawling through Etsy for a couple of hours looking for busts or miniatures or things, I'm now starting to look for things that have a good narrative about them. So for example, the one in the background, this is 2 miniatures that have been bashed together. So it's like a plague doctor with a weird. So I've taken the head off. It was a piece out of the the Blackstone Fortress sorcerer set, and then put it on this sort of cyberpunky character that's on all fours, and made it like a twisted sort of flesh slave or something like that. It's the sort of the way it's working out in my head, and that's I think that's part of it as well, is create a story for these things and something twisted. Now in this, we're going to get to the painting now, but those who've followed the channel know about the BPD and the cool horror stuff that I do with that. This miniature is now going to become a character within that universe, something I'll use on my RPG tabletops, and by creating that story and that narrative behind it, it almost brings it to life and makes it more believable, more realistic, and therefore more. The fact that it could be real and more believable, it adds something to the finished piece. The paint job itself, I'm really happy with the styles and things, but it's almost like it's got a new level now. Now again, this, I could be completely over the top with what I'm saying. Maybe I'm looking too much into it, but I found it's a really fascinating sort of thought experiment while you're painting. It's not just a miniature in an army. It's a story. It's a character. There's nuances about that individual or that monster that makes it come to life, and that's sort of what we'll be looking at. So as we go through the painting, there's a couple of things that I want to focus on, which I'll go through, but yeah, thanks for listening and indulging on this weird little rant for the last 10 minutes or so, but we'll get into the painting now. Right, so the painting. So to begin with, I wanted quite a cold sort of undertone to this. So I did all the flesh in this in lilac. These are all Pro Acryl again for the paints, but yeah, so like a lilac-y purple. And then what I'm doing is I'm adding the flesh tone from Pro Acryl, mixing it in with the purple just slightly, and then building up those layers until we get to just the flesh tone itself. And then you'll see in a moment as we go through the processes, for that, going back to the GRIMDARK, so it's adding different washes, different colours to create overlays, and then multiple layers of texture and tone. So the skin itself starts to look more alive than just a couple of flat plates of highlights. It starts to add more to it. So, but to begin with, yeah, just layers of the flesh tone mixed in with this purple to create this nice lilac colour, and then build it up until I get just to the flesh tone itself as the highest highlight. Right, so at this point the whole of the flesh area has had a Reikland flesh shade wash over the top. Just finishing that off now. And then, while that's starting to pool and dry, I'm then adding a green wash just into a few key areas, especially the darkest recesses, and that's mixing with the red, and it's giving these multiple sort of clean, these multiple layers of colour on the miniature, and it makes the skin start to look a bit more sickly and a bit more grotesque. And then again, we'll go in a second after this, and we'll start chucking in more highlights and more layers, very, very thin and watered down. And the idea is to build up that sort of translucency, like I did with the Paint in the Wasteland video a couple of weeks ago. It's a similar idea to that, but it's all of this is building up different colours and different textures, so the skin just reads as more believable and more grotesque and disgusting. All these steps that I'll go into now, this will also be done onto the little character at the bottom, but the main focus of this miniature is the Plague Doctor himself. And we can see now this is where I'm starting to build up those extreme, very, very extreme highlights. So I've got the flesh tone mixed in with a little bit of ivory, just to give it that bit more punch and brightness. But what I'm doing, you'll see, is I'm not actually following the lines perfectly. I'm dotting, I'm scraping. You know, I don't want this to look like a perfectly painted miniature, as it were. So anything that's a raised part of the miniature is just getting a few dots here and there. And as the miniature comes together, because it's got a really, really nice sort of contoured body and a lot of cool shapes within itself here, that it starts to show, and hopefully it comes across on camera that this skin, you know, it's looking just a little bit sickly, a bit, maybe a little bit necrotic, and it's adding to the effect. Now with this particular miniature as well, a bit of influence that came to me that I really like the idea of. So because it's quite a thin, it's got this flesh showing that's quite scarred and mottled. So my mind immediately went to Hellraiser and the Cenobites. So what I've decided is with the coal black from Procryl, I'm going to base coat all of these sort of capes and flows of fabric, because I'm going for that sort of Cenobite, you know, on the edge of sort of that bondage sort of look that's in the film, just because I think it adds a really nice, interesting detail to it. And again, with the fact that it's got this creature chained up with a collar, it adds to that sort of master and slave sort of look and feel, which is what I'm going for on the miniature. Right, so at this point, these pustules that are growing off the shoulders, and there's a little bit on the side of the head and the very underside of the cloak. What I'm using now is because I mentioned in my Procryl review, you can really push these paints and with the pigments. And with the yellow, I've heavily watered it down, and then I'm starting to dab this on. Now at this point, it looks quite bright, but once that dries, it leaves a really nice sort of yellowy hue on top of it, which makes it, you know, it's that idea of these things are ready to pop. They're pustules full of disease and things, and that, yeah, it's a very grotesque, a very disgusting creature. And again, you'll see as the colours start to dry, they become very muted, which is something we mentioned at the very start of the video in that sort of what is the GRIMDARK style. Now just doing all the strapping and things in a nice leather brown. One thing to note as well, which unfortunately I forgot to film that part, but if you remember last week's video where we were looking at the Dirty Down Rust and moss paints, so on the base, all around those pustules and the underneath of the slave and things, I've actually just put a thick layer of Dirty Down Rust on, and then I'll go in later with some Chameleon Earthshade and using that itself with the green pigment in there to start brushing it out, and it just adds a nice layer of sort of, where the idea is this creature's, all these pustules are breaking as it's moving, all that pus and disgustingness is seeping out, and it's rusting and decaying the ground around it. And again, going back to that, adding a narrative to this thing. Okay, so after I've added some silver details, just these few little buckles, the mask and these sort of syringe fingers, now I'm going to go have some fun with that Dirty Down Rust. So I'll start off with a very thin layer on anything that's metallic, and then certain areas we're going to bulk it up so it looks, as it dries, like we saw in last week's video, it really starts to add a lot of texture and a lot of extra detail to the miniature. So initially everything's just going to get this very quick coat, and then we'll build up layers on that, especially around what I wanted is, so because he's got these syringes for fingers, the way I imagined it is if he's pulling out blood from his victims, obviously that's going to pool and sort of coagulate around the tips of the syringes themselves. So I put a heavier blob of the rust on there, mixed in with a little bit of red paint, and it just helps sell that sort of, this very decaying, disgusting thing. You can see here I'm going very uneven on the syringes. They're not all at the same level. So obviously, some of them will be dug in deeper into the flesh of the victims and whatnot. But yeah, this Dirty Down Rust is a fantastic paint to use. Right, and then the final step, just to grime everything up, is so I'm going to just pop this, it's a mixture of about 5 or 6 different brown shades and inks I've had over the years that are in this big pot, and it gives this lovely grimy effect on everything. So all the black cloths get in this. Then I make a point of going in so the skin gets a nice satin varnish, the areas of the cloth get a matte varnish, and then where the pustules are, the floor and the bottom part of the robes as well, they all get a glossier varnish, and the idea being that that's all the wet stuff, all the pustules that are popping and things, and yeah, it really adds to the finished product. I love playing with varnishes anyway, but again, going back to that, the Grim Compendium guys, after listening to their videos and watching the styles and the things that they use in there, I think varnishes in particular can add a lot to a miniature, and it's something I've been playing with for a few years, but watching their videos I've got a better understanding of how to actually use them, and it's a really nice process and something I enjoy doing on miniatures. So we'll go on to the glamour shots now. You can get to have a look at this thing in its completion. I absolutely enjoyed painting this miniature. And again, really trying to go in full for that grimdark style and making it, really grotesque and dystopian. For me, I lean more towards the horror anyway, and I feel like the grimdark sort of marries into it quite well. But yeah, see what you think. Let me know. Was this style of video interesting? Where so instead of just going into the painting, he's talking about the style a bit more. Because I've been going on this deep dive on grimdark, and I found it absolutely fascinating sort of subject to go into, and really did enjoy that whole process of, because for me, I like making stories anyway. I like RPGs and things, so the idea of getting a miniature that looks good, that speaks to you, and then painting it in a style that marries with the narrative that you've created for it. I think it's a really fascinating sort of way of working. But yeah, like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Thank you very much for all the support and all the views and things. Go check out the GRIMDARK compendium. A big shout out to Yappy Crafts on Etsy. I brought this miniature at my own money. It's a shop I've used a few times, and recommend anyone, if you're looking for some really high quality 3D prints, go and check them out. Absolutely fantastic shop. Everything arrives beautifully. It's really high quality. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, guys. We'll see you on the next video. Hope you've enjoyed it. Take care.